We go from the predictive quarter to that proactive quarter. And then our third quarter is the prevailing quarter. And then finally, we conclude the year with the perspective quarter, where we'll look back at what all has happened across all of these different domains. And that is going to be a pretty insane writing, data collection, analysis, and editing process because so much is going to happen just in 2025 alone.
In a world defined by relentless innovation and geopolitical shifts, understanding what's truly next is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. This is RTX, the future. Your guides through tomorrow's complex landscape are two individuals with unparalleled insight. Jay Mazzelli, co-founder and CEO of Red Thread X, a retired Army colonel and a veteran leader in defense and technology innovation, brings decades of experience from the front lines of strategic development. Nate Platts, an active duty lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, actively shaping future capabilities through advanced data and strategic sustainment. Together, Jay and Nate offer a rare vantage point, having advised at the highest levels, navigated complex technological revolutions, and influenced the strategic implications of innovation long before they hit the mainstream. On RTX, the future, they cut through the noise to deliver the unvarnished truth about what's coming, why it matters, and what you can do about it. Stop guessing. Start knowing.
What's going on, Jay?
Hey, Nate, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well.
Excellent. It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I'm excited to do yet another podcast. This is awesome.
I know. I'm having so much fun with this, man. Can't believe that we 14 episodes now, right?
Yeah, this is number 14.
This is number 14, and pretty important episode because yes, we already kicked off season 2, but we have wrapped up the report. It's getting ready to come out, and man, there's going to be some mind-bending stuff in this thing.
Yeah, pencils down for sure. It was fun to put that together, learned a lot, and excited to see it polished and published.
Ha! You say fun. I'm going to say intense because that was a pretty intense writing process because there's so much that has happened in the world just as we look back at the last 90 days. In fact, given that we've been very, very fortunate to pick up some new listeners since we started the podcast, I'd like you really to describe the structure of this report, how it fits into our annual cycle, and then pitch it over to you to talk about the process for deriving the report.
I think it's a great idea.
So we break the year into 4 quarters, and we look starting with the first quarter as the predictive quarter. And a lot of that's anchored in the fact that we've got some incredible events with things like the Consumer Electronics Show. The big sleeper this year was Commodity Classic and what we learned about agriculture during the first quarter. And then, of course, the capstone event for us really is South by Southwest in March as we wrap up the quarter. So we've got the predictive quarter. And then our second quarter, I'm just going to focus on that right now. We call it the proactive quarter. So here's what's happened in the world. Here's the insights we've gained from the predictive quarter. How are we applying those? What changes are occurring in the environment? What changes are we driving so that we can be proactive about the environment and proactive about all of the different technologies and the factors at play?
Yeah, and I think what we've seen in the last 90 days, and we're going to dig into it, is the things that were predicted, people are acting on them, right? So this is where we got the naming convention. In South by, it's a huge innovation conference that follows CES every year in Austin. It's an amazing experience if you haven't went. But there's a lot of great information that's put out there, a lot of tech innovators, a lot of innovators in general that talk about what's going to come in the future, which is why we got the predictive quarter. And man, they've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. I'm going to change that though, Nate. I'm going to say we've hit the nail on the head because each one of those folks was talking about very specific domains, whether it's technology or an aspect of humanity, like a deep dive on psychedelics or a deep dive on a particular asset of the space economy. I think our competitive advantage, though, remains that we go lateral.
Yeah, we do go lateral. And we're going to discuss the process that we have in approaching this report after we finish wrapping up, explaining these 4 quarters.
So I would propose, given that the report's coming out here really, really, really soon, and we're going to be mapping that out over the rest of season 2 of RTX The Future, when we do these podcast episodes, I would just like to share with you my biggest observations and hear your biggest observations.
Yeah, Jay. So I think, before we talk about this report, we should map out, the annual process and, how we go about structuring the 4 reports that we push out.
You're absolutely right, Nate. We go from the predictive quarter to that proactive quarter. And then our third quarter is the prevailing quarter. And then finally, we conclude the year with the perspective quarter, where we'll look back at what all has happened across all of these different domains. And that is going to be a pretty insane writing, data collection, analysis, and editing process because so much is going to happen just in 2025 alone. And we'll start to build this out year to year.
100%. And, we wrote a lot about what we were predicting for the year and, beyond the year in the predictive quarter. And it's amazing to see, how those predictions have been acted on, hence the proactive quarter. And I'm excited to see how they continue to prevail and how they continue to develop. And looking back at the end of this year, our first year putting this report together, but what we learned, what we got right, what we got wrong, we're pretty honest with that. And then, what we think is going to come for the following, 5-10 years. And, we go to these conferences and we read all these, sources of information. You mentioned that there was a sleeper conference that you went to that, was kind of off the beaten path, but had some incredible nuggets of information.
Yeah, and it's only going to get better as we continue to refine our product and our processes.
You wrote down the 4 quarters that we write about. Let's talk a little bit about the process that we have and how we go about it. Because it's not just, we're not reporters. We're not just going, man, that person said X, Y, and Z. It's, this thing we call lateral intelligence. It's drawing data from both conventional and unexpected sources, right? Thought leadership around the world. It's, things we read, things we see, things we discuss. The conferences we attend, South by Southwest, CES, Commodity Classic, which I know was a big one for you this year that you got a lot of insight from. And we pull those together. And it's not just about seeing Ben Lamb talk about, Colossal and the stuff they're doing with the woolly mammoth, but it's about what he's doing and what's going on in the biotech space and what's going on in the space, literally, pun intended, and how those are, overlapping and how those are interweaving together for what we think is going to come and how we act on that, right? What are the business decisions? What are the business outcomes that can come and how it affects you?
Yep. And so far, it's proven to be quite the journey, isn't it, Nate? I mean, as we go through these first 2 quarters and we start mapping out what all's happening in this 3rd quarter, the prevailing quarter.
Yeah. So pencils down right on the report. We finished it. It was awesome. It was an intense writing session. What was the thing that stood out from you, right? We're not going to deep dive it in this podcast for all the topics because, it's going to be broken out over a series of podcasts. But what was the one thing that made you kind of rock back on your heels?
For me, it was how quickly technologies are manifesting in the space economy. And there's really 4 things that stand out very specifically about how quickly things are moving in space. The first is, to me, mind-blowing. We talked about this before, but the fact that that startup company Interloon in Seattle has signed a contract with the U.S. Department of Energy to deliver 3 liters of helium-3 harvested from the moon. So first time ever.
Yeah, we just talked about that. That was huge. It blows my mind also.
That is. The next one comes from a company called Tesserae, and their idea is very interesting. They want to break the paradigm of Earth assembly of these large space stations. And it becomes a huge constraint when you build it on Earth or if you build major components on Earth and then assemble those major components. And so, by example, the International Space Station was about $150 billion total cost between all the international partners, and the U.S. was about $100 billion of that cost. So $150 billion for a space station that can house no more than 13 people. So what a limiting factor, this huge cost for this very constrained, very purposeful space. Tesserae's technology, they are proposing to use permanent electromagnets to be able to assemble modules in space in any shape or size. And basically, it's giant hexagons connecting these permanent electromagnets to form whatever shape you need. So you could do a space station, living environment, you could do a factory, and it's almost unlimited in terms of what you can design and build.
And that saves on launch costs too. The larger the item, the more it weighs, the larger the rocket, the more expensive it is to push up. And you're constrained by the space of the rocket. But if you can launch tiny, bits of something and construct them in space, you have more flexibility, you have lower costs, and you have, you're not constrained by the rocket. You're constrained by, your imagination of keep in orbit.
Exactly. Yeah. In essence, you could take these polygons, have all of the faces of the polygons be electromagnets that are permanent, and then attach them in space. They permanently hold, and you can expand these shapes whatever direction you need to go for whatever purpose you need. The third thing that I found absolutely mind-blowing was the successful mission for the NASA Solar Parker probe.
Wow, what's that?
So the Parker Solar Probe, it's flew within 3.8 million miles of the sun. The closest a probe has ever gotten to the sun. And what it's going to allow us to do is really understand the dynamics of solar weather, which will not only have huge effects in space, but we already know have huge effects here on Earth as well. So the level of data collected was able to do, and how that'll help us with our predictive models for the impacts. And as we continue to operate further and further depth-wise and number of space vessels, whether satellites or manned stations, knowing with better fidelity what's happening out of solar weather will be just better for all of us involved. And then the last thing that stood out to me is that, and we talked about this in March 2025 because it happened here in Texas, well, from Texas. But in March 2025, Firefly was the first commercial lunar landing and the only successful one so far in terms of the actual payload module landing and executing everything it was intended to. And there have been other efforts, but they remain the only company that's achieved that effective mark of a commercial lunar landing.
Yeah, moon's hard to get to, right? It's far away. You said it wasn't far away, but it really is far away. It takes a lot of skill, math, technology, and resources to get there. I know that, like you said, there's been a couple that have tried, but only one's been successful this year so far. It's pretty interesting.
Yes, it is. So those are my big observations from the space domain as we think about how quickly and how much it has changed just in 90 days. What about you, Nate?
So the one that kind of rocked me back was reproductive medicine, and we've talked about biotechnology, biohealth, the Don't Die movement, Brian Johnson, but there's some really amazing things in the last 90 days that have come out of the reproductive medicine scene, which is kind of a very small niche area, but there's a 3-parent IVF, there's 2 biological fathers, and there's artificial blood, and also artificial gametes, or sperm, ovaries, that kind of stuff. So in the UK, 8 healthy babies have been born using 3-parent IVF, right? Not a 2-parent IVF, but a 3-parent IVF. The DNA from these 3 individuals were brought together, and it prevents the transmission of severe mitochondrial genetic diseases. And so I'm interested to see how this develops and how this progresses. Secondly, right, the scientists at Kyushu University successfully created mice from 2 biological fathers. So not a male and a female, but 2 males, and they created a baby. The geneticist at Osaka University, which if you haven't been to Osaka, it is a great place to go. Osaka University, they're working to create lab-grown gametes, so lab-grown sperm, lab-grown eggs. And we talked about the synthetic value of biotechnology and where this goes, and what does it mean to be human. And so this kind of takes it down to the micro of you have potential for conception to come from a truly artificial source, which I think is fascinating. And then lastly, Nara Medical University, they're in clinical trials right now for artificial blood with potentially a 2-year shelf life. And so for those of you that have ever served in the military or been to a place where there's large surgeries going on, blood is a critical resource. And getting the right type of blood, matching it to the right patient, having it on hand, storing it, it's a big problem. It's a huge logistical problem for hospitals, especially for reacting to crisis. So this is a really interesting development to see what comes to this, and how it's used, and then what impacts it has in the field of medicine. So that was the reproductive medicine and the synthetic blood. They really kind of rocked me back, and I was excited to dig into those topics.
And that's just a teaser on basically your top topics and my top topics within one red thread each. And what I love about this proactive quarter model is we took the 5 red threads from the predictive quarter and we introduced that 6th red thread of mattering.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say anything beyond strap on and wait for that. That's going to be our closeout topic as we go through the season, because there's just so much meat in there that we're going to have to really, really dig into to understand how all of this builds and creates both opportunity and pressure for the human condition.
Yeah, mattering in a digital world. It is a relevant topic. It's a pressing crisis, and we dug into this, and I can't wait to talk about it on the podcast.
I hear you, Nate. So, hey, man, it's always great to talk to you.
Likewise, Jay. Have a great night. Cheers.
Thanks. Be seeing you.